welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. With me today is longtime listener, poet laureate, and Taya Master Anne-Marie Young. This is your Daily Dose of Happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. And Anne-Marie, as I was thinking about our show today, as so often happens, we get very unusual, interesting guests from a variety of backgrounds, talking about a variety of topics, and we learn a lot. Sometimes we actually, buy books because we like what's going on in the books and so forth. This week is no exception, because we're going to be talking with somebody who describes herself as an erotic entrepreneur. That alone just kind of gets the mind going, right? Kind of makes you wonder, okay, where is this going? Yeah, it is intriguing, right? Well, we're going to find out exactly how intriguing in just a moment, because we're going to get the story directly from her. Her name is Annie Temple. And Annie, first of all, hi, welcome to the program. How you doing?
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you
here.
We're excited to have you, especially since we're about to learn how on earth you became the erotic entrepreneur. That's not exactly a common title these days.
I know. I haven't heard it very much, but when I was trying to come up with a title for my business Bible, it didn't seem right to refer to everyone in the adult entertainment industry as sex workers. And I thought erotic entrepreneurs really kind of covers the whole spectrum, because we work in so many different areas of the industry that you can't really describe it perfectly with the word sex worker.
Okay. So we've heard that exactly from the expert's mouth, but you got to tell us, how did all of this come about?
Well, when I was 23 years old, I was struggling financially, working at a leather jacket a leather jacket shop as a salesperson, and I wasn't making ends meet, and I hated my job. As I think a lot of women can relate, it can be difficult to find work when you're young and you don't have skills yet or education yet, and you're stuck in these minimum wage jobs where you don't get treated very well, and if you're really struggling, it can be difficult to break out of that. And at the time, I was a small town girl in a big city, and I tried to get waitressing jobs because I had waitressed in my small town, but the places that I was applying at were looking for someone with a lot more experience. So I just kept getting turned down. And so I was, forced to try to get by on this retail wage. And so I decided to try something different. One of my friends was working as an exotic dancer, which you may understand better as stripper or striptease artist. And she suggested to me that I try working even just one day a week doing that, because I could make over $100 that one day a week. And this was in 1997. So $100 in a day was huge for me back then. And I considered that, but I became so unhappy at my job that I decided I really need to just try it, just give it a shot. So I went out one night and I phoned an agent and I went to a strip club and I worked my first night as an exotic dancer. And in 3.5 hours, I made the same amount of money that I made in 2 weeks at my leather jacket job.
Wow.
Yes, I know, right? So the next morning, I didn't go to work. I phoned in and I said,
I wonder why.
Exactly. I took my 2 roommates at the time out for breakfast, and I called from a payphone on the way because we didn't have cell phones back then. And I said, I'm not coming into work today or ever. And that started me on my erotic entrepreneur journey. But
now, I have to ask you 2 things, because two questions immediately come to mind. The first question that comes to mind is, no one would ever want to see me in a strip club anyway, but assuming that I even considered something like that, I'm not even sure I could bring myself to do that. How did that mental process work for you?
One thing about me that I've realized is a little bit different from a lot of people is that I love to take risks. And I love excitement and I love adventure. And I also won't settle. I will never settle. And so in that situation, I didn't want to settle for being poor and struggling financially. And this was an exciting, adventurous opportunity. It scared me It scared me so much, but anything that ever scared me when I was growing up made me want to confront it.
Wow.
And so even as a young child, I grew up in a, poor and a rough neighborhood and got in a lot of fights and stuff. I'm only 5 feet tall now, and I was always the littlest then, but people were still scared of me.
Ah. So you had a lot of confidence is what it sounds like.
I think I just was, I just recently read a book by Curtis Jackson, 50 Cent. And he says in the book that most people are comfortable in their fear, but he's uncomfortable in his fear. And it was the first time I heard someone put it like that. And I feel like that describes me. I'm very uncomfortable in my fear. I have to like confront it and face it and do something about it.
Very good. Yeah, I like that. That's a good way of looking at the whole fear thing too. Now, the other question that came to my mind almost instantaneously was, what did it feel like when you called in to your old job and said, I'm not coming in today or ever?
Oh my gosh, that felt so incredible. It was so empowering. And I was a girl who came from a very feminist background, and I'd already been in college and taken women's studies courses. And the adult entertainment industry is not painted in a very good light, or at least back then, not at all. No. Now there's some discussion about it. But back then there was a lot of, painting the whole adult entertainment industry as something that's exploitative towards women.
Right.
And so when I got into stripping, I really got into it out of desperation and needing the money. But I believed that hype. I believed that sex industry workers were oppressed and degraded. So when I became an exotic dancer, and my experience was completely different from what I'd been taught to believe, and I felt very empowered, and it changed everything for me. People that had previously intimidated me didn't intimidate me anymore, because I was faced with men from every walk of life in the club every single day. And they treated me with respect. And so I became confident and comfortable in my own skin. And I just became empowered in so many ways, not just financially, but just in viewing the human race in a different way. And I'd gone in like very, very traumatized from my childhood and my young adulthood, and having a very bad attitude towards men. But when I was actually in the strip clubs and started meeting these really kind, wonderful men, and not all of them are really wonderful and kind.
No, I would imagine, yeah.
Yeah, but not all of them are terrible either. So when I started to meet some really kind and wonderful men, then I started to assess my own views and my own stereotypes, I guess, or stigmas towards other people.
I can somewhat identify with this, not in the sense of ever having considered, joining an exotic strip club. I mean, that was never on the agenda even slightly, but I can appreciate it from the point of view of doing the podcast, because as I've mentioned here so many times, I learn the most from all the different perspectives of the guests and co-hosts I have with me on the show. And you just described a scenario in which you learned a whole bunch from the people that you had now surrounded yourself with, because they were a completely new set of perspectives from anything that you had encountered before. That's the same thing in that sense.
Yes, 100%. When I went back to university, I took women's studies again, and I wasn't brave enough to tell my classmates that I was a stripper.
Gee, I wonder why.
But I did want to write about the empowerment that I was experiencing. And so when I tried to look up sources and I couldn't find any, I went to the horse's mouth, as they say, and I started interviewing all my colleagues. And then I wrote a paper about it, and I submitted it, and my teacher wouldn't accept it. She's like, no, you have to have other sources, like published sources. And then she introduced me to published sources that I hadn't been able to find. So that really opened a new door for me.
I'm just kind of imagining that conversation with your women's studies teacher. I'm just like, kind of creating that scene in my mind. And I know,
Walt, it was so scary because I had handed in my paper and with everyone else, and then we waited a few weeks, and then she said, okay, everyone will be getting their papers back at the end of this class. And at the end of class, she handed out all the papers except mine and asked me to come to her desk afterward. And I thought she was going to like hold an intervention or something. But she was actually incredible. Like, I feel like, God puts people in your path that are really meant to be there. And she was one of those people. And she led me to books that were written by feminist sex workers. And that just was mind blowing for me. And that changed the whole trajectory of my life at that point. And that really got me on the path of becoming an erotic entrepreneur.
That's interesting on a number of different levels, not the least of which that she had already on hand a list of exotic sex workers who had written books. I mean, that alone is rather impressive. But there's also another piece of this that I just can't skip this part. I have a thing about authority. I think there's too much attention given to authority across the board in every single walk of life, every single issue, every single angle that you can think of. And this is a perfect example of it, because she wasn't willing to accept firsthand accounts from sex workers, but she was willing to accept books by sex workers.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact
that's a university thing, though. I think that's a university flaw.
It is.
For sure. And I agree with you 100%. And when I realized that the university didn't really want anything original from its students, that was a huge letdown for me. And I didn't last much longer. And being exposed to these intelligent, academic sex workers in the books that I was reading, that kind of gave me permission to accept my job and love my job and appreciate my customers. Whereas before I had felt like I was supposed to be angry at my customers, and I internalized a lot of that shame that is put on people who are in this industry because I hadn't been given any other perspective. And when you're not given any other perspective, a lot of people think that everyone who works in the sex industry doesn't want to be there. A lot of people believe that we're all forced. We're all sexually exploited. And that's not true, obviously. And there are people who are sexually exploited, but I wouldn't call them sex workers. I would call them people who are sexually exploited. It's completely different, but a lot of people don't see the differences,
I can't honestly say you're the first exotic dancer we've had on the show. The first one was a male exotic dancer that we had on about 2 years ago, something like that, which was a very interesting conversation. And he said very much the same kind of thing you just said, that, the perception and the reality are quite different from each other.
Yes.
So you're reinforcing an old theme that hasn't been revisited in quite some time here on the show, but you're revisiting that same theme in the same way. There's a refreshing sense of security in that. Like, wow, okay, so Paul's message was the same as what Annie's message is. That's pretty cool. I like that. Yeah.
And it's like, I think people need to question, do we want to vilify sex or sexuality or sensuality? Do we want to vilify that, or do we want it to be something that's beautiful and sacred and wonderful? And if we want it to be beautiful and sacred and wonderful, then why do we vilify people that are in the sex industry? And the reason is because there's a financial exchange. And as soon as there's a financial exchange, apparently that creates a morality conflict. And, that's unfortunate because people trade every kind of service you can imagine for money. And so why do we draw the line at something that a lot of people wouldn't have access to if it wasn't out there to purchase?
Right. Yeah. And that's a big deal right there all by itself. The fact that we do vilify it is in and of itself, it's fascinating. We vilify a number of things that have money attached to them. For instance, I'll often see people posting, they're spammers, but they're posting their spam messages, and the spam messages start off with, "I know it's wrong to be self-promoting, but," and then they promote themselves.
That's true.
But nevertheless, I mean, it's kind of, that's got its own issues, but it's true. I mean, that does.
And then in my industry, we have something called the whorearchy. It's like a hierarchy. Okay. That nobody wants to be a whore because there's something called the whore stigma, and a whore is the lowest you can be. And so in the adult entertainment industry, we have people struggling to differentiate themselves from the lowest whore, for instance. But then you'll have within those ranges. So for instance, in the exotic dance industry, you'll have private dancers versus stage dancers. Or in the intimacy part of the industry, you'll have full service sex workers versus massage providers. And then they'll we'll separate ourselves based on who gets paid more, who gets paid less. But I mean, it's very reflective of our society. But a lot of people don't realize that even we internalize that whore stigma, that perception, and then we create these hierarchies within our industry. And it's unfortunate. And it's nice when we can realize that everyone deserves respect, kindness, and dignity, regardless of where they are on the whore spectrum or in society anyway,
Any other spectrum for that matter, yeah.
I apologize for using that word so much.
It's not one we use very often around here. That's one thing that these conversations do for me. They challenge me to my limits. How far can I go on these conversations? I learn a lot about myself this way. I mean, Amory, I kind of suspect it's probably true for you too. I mean, it's not a comfortable subject. This isn't something that we will talk about regularly here on the show, but it's an important subject because it's a part of life. It's a major portion of what goes on in life we wouldn't be here without it. I mean, we'd be missing from this planet entirely if it wasn't for sex.
Exactly. And not everybody's comfortable or wants to settle down and have that kind of relationship. And, there's services for everything everywhere. And it's in the Bible. It's,
True.
Amory's having some internet connection.
But one
issues.
thing
You warned me about. Oh, there she is.
No,
wait, that's all right.
Yeah,
it's okay.
can you hear me? Yeah.
We know it's happening. Go ahead. Finish up.
Yeah, it's been going all cool so far. So yeah, it just baffles me how people just look down on it, because it is something that I think dancing is beautiful. The body is beautiful. Why are people so embarrassed and so het up about that? That baffles me. But being from the UK, I just need to know, what is women's studies?
Oh, okay. Yes. Well, women's studies is basically the study of feminism in universities. So they call it women's studies.
Okay.
But it's really feminist theory and that kind of thing.
Thank you.
The F word.
The F word.
So with the whole culture of social media, and things are a lot more open and out there, you've got OnlyFans and there's so much other stuff going on the internet. Has that changed perception, have you found? And has that made people feel stronger and more proud and less judgmental about it? That's a very
interesting question. And I think that you have totally hit the nail on the head. In some ways, the adult entertainment industry has gone mainstream because of OnlyFans and the internet and how people can find almost anything at their fingertips. As a mother, I don't agree with that at all. I don't feel that my children should be able to go online and search porn and just find it easily. But as someone who also believes very strongly in freedom of speech, I can't see how that can really be policed. That's the issue. Our government in Canada is coming out with ideas like facial recognition technology to determine if the customers coming to the site have a face that is the right age. But we know that facial recognition technology is very, very, faulty. And so a lot of people, will be, anyway, I don't agree with that either. That to me is like the police going out into the street and collecting the DNA of all the street-based sex workers just so they know who it was that died if they get murdered. To me, that's not the correct way to go about this. The correct way to go about this is to make sure that the people coming onto the platform have ID and that there's a paywall and you have to maybe prove your ID to get behind that paywall or something like that. And I do believe in that. And I'm on OnlyFans and I have a page that you can't see anything unless you subscribe, and you can't subscribe unless you're an adult. So I I really believe in that. I don't think, as much as I like being able to find porn free online, don't get me wrong. I do feel like as a mother that makes my job a lot harder. So, and the only thing I can really do is I just tell my kids, if you see something and you want to talk about it or you have questions, come to me and ask me. And then I try to be very open and honest. And my youngest right now is 12. So she comes home from school and asks me some very interesting questions like, Mom, what is cum? Or, you know, Mom, what's a blowjob? And she's hearing these things at school. So we know that the elementary school kids are going online and looking at porn. You know what I mean? But yeah,
I'm pretty sure that the elementary school kids were knowing about this before the internet. So, I mean,
well, I know I did. If you remember yourself from that age, right? It just wasn't as easy to get.
It wasn't as easy. This is true.
Yeah. Like now I could like search up and see a bunch of naked men. Whereas when I was younger, I would need to go to Wreck Beach to see that.
Yep. Very true. It's also one of those things that is, I mean, you mentioned the facial recognition, and it's one of those things that when you were describing that, I was thinking that whoever is proposing that within the Canadian government has very little understanding of the IT industry. And the reason I say that is because, first of all, the people in our culture who pick up on computers the quickest are the young. So essentially they're trying to stay ahead of the ability of the young to be able to handle new technology as it comes along. And what does that new technology include? It's where the facial recognition comes from, AI. And it's getting to the point very, very quickly now where the young people are going to be the first ones experimenting the most with, how do I change my look through AI? So now you have to have software. Starts to get really, really problematic and expensive to build, software that can overcome the ability of the child to put up a fake face. Good luck.
Like you're referring to like deep fakes, for instance, right?
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
I know. It's just crazy. It's terrifying, actually. Not to laugh at what's terrifying, but it is kind of terrifying.
And I don't think the politicians realize just how much deep fake is a threat to them.
No doubt.
Yeah, because they're the ones who are going to be deep faked the most.
Yes.
That's true.
Ahead of everybody else, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So when they start writing the legislation, they have to keep thinking about, well, how is this going to affect my political career?
And that's such a funny thing to say too, because historically, like I've been a sex worker activist for over 20 years. And it's so funny because every time, someone really goes after sex workers, a politician really goes after them, it's crazy how many times that person will later come out in the news and they've been visiting sex workers. And they're right into it and it's a part of their life. And it's like they're trying to deflect or something. And it's just so hypocritical though at the same time.
I call it the Donald Trump syndrome. And the reason I call it the Donald Trump syndrome is that anytime Donald Trump is about to be accused of something, he accuses his opponents of it first. That makes it okay.
I was not aware of that, but I could see him
That's his
doing
pattern.
that.
That's what he does routinely. It doesn't matter what it is. As soon as he knows he's going to be accused of something, he accuses his opponent of it.
He just deflects.
It's a way of deflecting, yeah, because if his opponent is guilty of it, then it doesn't really matter whether he's guilty of it. At least that's his perception of it. And that perception actually does play out. I mean, his supporters certainly have no trouble with that idea, you know.
And that's another thing, because sex workers are so involved in like lobbying the government for our rights. Like the sex worker rights movement around the world is so huge. And yet we try to speak to people in positions of power and often they just completely ignore us and they don't view us as human beings. And I don't think they realize like how massive our community is, because
how massive is it? I don't even know. How big is it?
I mean, the numbers are hard to really figure out, right? But if you think about how many, like if you go onto classified sites, or if you go onto like some of the social media sites that really cater to the adult entertainment industry, I mean, there's just thousands and thousands and thousands from everywhere.
Wow.
But then you think about the ones that are hiding what they're doing and only doing it on the side, because there's a lot of sex workers out there who are disabled, or they have a regular full-time job or whatever they're doing normally, and then they privately do sex work on the side because they can't make ends meet otherwise. And so there's this whole hidden population of adult entertainers as well. And I like to use adult entertainer, that word, more because I think people automatically stigmatize sex workers because the word sex, even my kids have trouble saying the word sex. Like,
really? That's interesting.
Yeah, I know. My kids.
That's really interesting.
I know. So I've had to like really like talk to them, and I'm the kind of mom that I try to normalize it enough that they feel comfortable to talk to me about anything. Because I think that our friendship is the most important thing. And,
Sure.
and as Anne-Marie was saying about, mainstreaming, the adult entertainment industry with OnlyFans and that kind of thing, that was one of the first things I felt comfortable telling my kids that I was doing, was online content, because it is more socially acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And that's true. The more that something becomes more mainstream, the easier it is to discuss it, the easier it is to bring it into any kind of conversation, to just, make it part of everyday life. So, and, what was OnlyFans? OnlyFans certainly has done that. The internet in general has done that. A lot of things have contributed to that. But I mean, I'm just thinking about the fact that here I am having a conversation with you and Anne-Marie about a topic that, if I had, now I've been doing the podcast for 11 years, but if I had started this podcast, say 25 years ago, this would have been a really dangerous topic. Now it's like nothing by comparison. But 25 years ago, this would have been a very risky topic to do.
Definitely. And about 20 years ago was probably when I started coming out in the media. And back then they wouldn't even call sex workers, that they were prostitutes, even though a lot of people were asking for the language to be changed. Now the language is very socially acceptable. Sex worker is the language that most journalists use. But 20 years ago, not at all. And I remember when I was coming out in the media and doing events and that kind of thing 20 years ago, people would write letters, like angry letters, trying to say that I'm legitimizing a career that shouldn't be legitimized, et cetera, et cetera. But what was so surprising, in fact, almost 20 years ago exactly, oh no, it wasn't. It was 2007, so not quite. But in 2007, I coordinated an event called, it's a stripathon, which means you take off your clothes. Everybody donates their shows. All the strippers donate their shows. And then we raise money for some kind of cause.
Oh, okay.
We had we were doing a yearly event called Exotic Dancers for Cancer. And the year before, we had found a cancer organization that was willing to accept our donation. And we'd had trouble finding one because they didn't want to be associated with us. So the year before, a major organization had accepted our donation, and we were so excited. So this new year came, we were like, we're going to go to that. We're going to give it to them again. And so I sent them a letter because I was coordinating the event, and I'm like, yeah, we want to give you our donation again. And they didn't answer me. And then weeks went by, and we had the entire event planned, and we were just, weeks away from it. And all we had to do was start promoting, put out our posters, send out our press release, all of that. And we just needed to make sure that they were going to be our organization. And I received a letter back from them saying that they were sorry, but major donors didn't support them having connection with exploited exotic dancers, and they wouldn't be accepting our donation, and they hoped we understood. So we were disappointed, but we were also used to being, refused. And I didn't want to phone around and send out some more heartfelt letters trying to find an organization that would take our money. So what I did instead, because I'd gone to college and learned how to write press releases and all that kind of stuff. And I was a marketing manager in my square life part-time, and I wrote a press release saying, strippers looking for charity to accept their donation. And I became famous overnight. Like, the whole world was interested in this subject, and the letters so every local newspaper picked me up. All the national newspapers picked me up. Blogs and news stations around the world picked it up.
Wow.
It was insane. And what we were so shocked about was the amount of letters to the editor that poured in supporting us. And what we realized was supporting us. And what we realized is that society isn't as judgmental as societal norms would make you believe.
Yeah.
You know?
Some
of us were like in tears. We were, some of my colleagues were like in tears. They were just so moved that people were supporting us and acknowledging that we could make a choice to do this work and that we weren't forced into it, et cetera,
It's almost like you gave people an opportunity to speak on something that they never had the opportunity to speak on before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they all could still hide because in this industry, people don't want to show their face. And so by me being willing to show my face and going back and saying, what do you want me to say? I wouldn't say that I was speaking on behalf of everyone, because there were definitely times when I said things that my colleagues in my community weren't impressed with. But, we each come into every situation as an individual, and I can't possibly speak for everyone, you know? So I only claim to speak for myself.
It's always a wise practice. I don't care what topic you're talking about, but I could see, especially with this one, that would be a particularly wise practice. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because this is a very individualistic kind of topic, kind of issue, if you will. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I was just kind of musing. It was probably, I was thinking back to the question I asked early on about how, I couldn't really imagine myself going up on stage. Not that anybody would want to watch me, but going up on stage and doing a strip. The thing I can imagine even less is coming out as a spokesman or for what I'm trying to do, let alone for anybody else trying to do in that industry, trying to find somebody, some organization willing to accept donations. That to me would be like 1,000 times harder than just going into the club and stripping off. And that alone would be hard. No, I don't think I could do that one. But the second one, like, no way. You're not getting me anywhere near that.
Yeah. The first time I took my clothes off in the strip club, I asked myself, am I going to freak out? Am I going to go running off stage? Am I going to be able to do this? And I was so surprised how much easier it was than I expected it to be. But being in the media, for me, that was something that felt like a calling, honestly.
Wow.
I just never felt like I could keep my mouth shut about the things I believe in. And that's gotten me into trouble a lot of times, but I can't help who I am.
Well, who you are serves you. I mean, in this role that you're playing, it serves you tremendously, because I asked myself, how could I bring myself to do that? And I can't come up with a way to do that. I think you just came up with the way you do it by saying, I can't do it any other way.
Yeah, it's so true.
Wow.
I'm sure my kids sometimes wish I would shut up when I'm talking about this or anything else I have an opinion about. But the good thing that I can at least say about myself, that although I am opinionated and loud about it, I am also open-minded, and I'm the type of person that I can change my mind if someone can convince me. And my kids have taken advantage of that.
Yeah, once they figure out that they have an angle, they'll always push that angle. This is true. It doesn't matter what the angle is. Yeah. Emery, you kind of had another connection issue, but you got back in, so we're really glad that you're back in.
Oh, me too.
For joining us. I don't know how much of that conversation you caught. I imagine you missed some of it. I'm not sure how much of it you caught. But, you were asking some questions before. Did you have more questions that you wanted to bring into this before I kind of took her to the next place?
I think what I want to know about is your tenaciousness and how you help other people with fighting that fear and working through it, because whatever industry, that's a skill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the fearlessness, or the ability to at least face my fear and push through it, was something I think as I already said, came from childhood and having just, a poor upbringing and growing up in a rough neighborhood and having family members that didn't expect anything less, But what really changed me and made me become a better person, because all of that's fine. I was fearless. I could face anything, but I also had a chip on my shoulder. I had a lot of anger. I didn't communicate very well in relationships. I was a hothead. I did a lot of blaming and self-pitying, and that changed when I was pregnant with my son, my second child, and I was in a bookstore. And I was looking for a book to send my cousin who was in jail. And I was picking up self-help books. And I picked up this one book and I opened it up. Oh, this looked pretty good. Thought, I'll purchase this. And I went home and I was going to send it to him, but first I wanted to read a little more. I don't know if you guys are bookworms like me, but anyway, so I started reading a little bit of the book and I couldn't put it down. So I went back to the bookstore and I bought 3 more copies to give out to my cousin and my brother and another person that I felt at the time could really use that book. And the book was called There's a Spiritual Solution for Every Problem by Wayne Dyer.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yes. And that book just completely changed me. And it changed me at a perfect time because it was right before I became very sick suddenly. I had a reaction to a pharmaceutical that started years and years of autoimmune issues and led to surgeries and losing my large intestine and all kinds of things. Ooh. And I think if I hadn't had that book at that time, and that's why I say God puts your guides in your path when you need them the most. And Wayne Dyer helped me to get through those initial experiences of becoming suddenly disabled and losing everything. And then because that was a personal development situation, of course, of reading this book and becoming a better person, then I started to look at other self-help books. And then I went off and then I went right into the whole personal development thing. And I believe in something, I call it daily study and motivational buddies. And my daily study is that for at least 10 minutes to a half hour a day, I listen to some kind of audiobook or podcast or something like your guys' podcast that's uplifting. And that I feel like I'm getting something out of or learning something. And then I also surround myself with people who motivate me and not people who drag me down, which I think, you hear that a lot, especially in personal development circles. A big part of being able to level up is to not allow other people to bring you down. So.
Right. What does bring you up?
So I don't know if I answered your question, but becoming more aware of myself and my thinking and learning how to, stop and think. Like in Stoicism, they say, humans are like animals in the way that we react. We have an immediate instinctual reaction to whatever situation we might find threatening or whatever situation is happening in that moment. Mm-hmm. But humans are different from animals because we have the ability to rationalize and to stop and to think this through and to choose a different reaction or choose a different way of dealing with whatever situation has come up for us. So if there's 5 people and they're all on a boat that, it looks like it might sink, well, all 5 of them are going to be in fear, but the Stoic will be the one that isn't running around screaming, because they stopped themselves before they got to that point. And so I tried, for me, the biggest thing that I try, and I put this in my books and I do this with my children and people who come to me for coaching or when I'm speaking. And I try to say the only thing that we can control in our whole entire existence, there's only one thing that each of us can control, and that's what we think about. And people say, I can't control it. It just comes. Yeah, that's because you haven't practiced yet. But once you start practicing, you find you can control it and you can change it. And when I catch myself saying things like, oh, well, that was dumb, I say, no, it wasn't. I'm the best. And if I had a parrot, I would teach it to say, you're so awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There was a story, I'm a Miami Dolphins football fan, and there's a story that came out over the past week about the coach who's a very unusual coach. He's one of the most unusual coaches in all of NFL history, for a number of different reasons. But he did a production interview, meaning off-film interview, with a number of sports writers who were all kind of grouped together from some of the major networks in preparation for when they played the Kansas City Chiefs in Germany a week ago Sunday. And what came out of that meeting was a story told by one of the presenters, actually the guy who is who was the play-by-play announcer for that game and for the game this past weekend. And in that story, he talks about how Mike McDaniel, the coach, is sharing about answering the question about how he ended up providing the kind of support to the team's quarterback that the player really needed, because he'd been through some pretty rough times before McDaniel had taken over as coach. And the way McDaniel told the story, he said basically he himself had been brought up as an only child, and his mom had repeatedly told him as he was growing up that he was the most important person in the world, that he could do anything, that he was amazing, that he was unique, that he was about to play this incredible role in his life that she didn't even know what it was going to be, but he knew. He said in that interview, he knew he was going to be an NFL coach from age 4. So you can see how early he set that. But anyway, he's telling this story, and he's telling it in the context of what has gone on with his quarterback. And anybody who knows the NFL knows the whole Tua Tagovailoa story has been a really crazy story. It's been amazing and kind of terrifying what the guy has gone through. But McDaniel basically built him up, and he built him up the same way that his mom built him up. One of the sports writers who was there is a former WNBA basketball player named Stacey Dales. And at one point during the interview, she says, "Coach, you're making me cry," because of how he was telling this heartwarming connection that he had with his mom, and how his mom just kept building him up and so forth. And after the interview was over, the crew that had interviewed him were traveling back to their hotel together. And Stacey said to Rich Eisen, the guy who was telling the story, she said, "I never had a coach like him. If I had a coach like him, I would have run through a wall for him."
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And you think about a story like that, that's how important it is to have those kind of messages. So I hear you talking about how you give those messages to your children, and how you feel that that kind of messaging is important within your industry and within the whole idea of women's studies and so forth. And I think to myself, wow, this goes way beyond sex. What we're talking about here is about how do you treat people? How are you there for people? How do you support people?
Yes.
I mean,
and that's part of why I think people really undervalue people who work in the sex industry, especially in-person intimacy workers, because they are making such a huge difference in people's lives, like a huge difference. You know, it's okay for a nurse to put a catheter in somebody, or to wipe their butt, or to do whatever intimate services that they need in the context of nursing. But for some reason in our society, we don't think it's okay in the context of intimacy. And I feel like that's really sad, because I feel like a lot of people, it's all that's missing from their life. It's the one major ingredient. And especially today in our really connected world, people are lacking intimacy, and they're craving it, you know, even just to have someone's hand on their skin, or a hug, or, you know, someone like look them in the eyes and find them interesting and want to hear what they have to say. And that's one of my superpowers, is that when I meet people, I've always been able to see the good in them. And I think part of that is growing up in, you know, a rough neighborhood, and having family members and friends that a lot of society would demonize. And these were the people that I loved. And so I've always had an open mind and wanted to see, who is this person deep down? And so in all of my work, and especially as an erotic entrepreneur, a large part of what I do is just see people and acknowledge that they, you know, remind them who they are, remind them that they are special, and that they aren't just, you know, invisibly walking through this world existing, which a lot of people feel that way because they lack intimacy. Intimacy is so important, I think, you know.
what we're really doing here is we're drawing a connection between intimacy and self-confidence and self-belief.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But I do think this is another thing that needs to be educated in schools when our kids are young. That is, it's not a dirty word. It's a beautiful thing. And what the boundaries around that are, and not to be so judgmental about that. Everybody has different preferences.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of what our society does as a disservice is this whole idea in monogamy culture that we own each other. And so we get married. Now I own you. I don't have to try anymore. I don't have to work hard for you. I own you. And if you were to be with someone else, then you've betrayed me as deeply as anyone can ever be betrayed. But if we don't own each other, then we have to work to keep each other. If we don't own each other, then it's not the worst thing in the world if someone cheats. That it's something we could actually maybe work through and maybe even become stronger because we don't own that person. You know what I mean? Like it's just, and communication, that's the big thing. People can't communicate because we're stuck in these ideas of what our roles are supposed to be, and we want to force each other, control each other because we own each other, but that's what pushes us apart because people naturally don't want to feel controlled or owned by the other person. And so we naturally pull away from that, and any relationship, especially long-term relationships, are going to get hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. That's just what happens. And the trick is to recognize when that's happening and then have the communication skills and have the interest and the desire to get that intimacy back and make it happen. And when it doesn't come back and when you can't make it happen and when that relationship inevitably ends, being able to let go with love and then look for the next, maybe not the next relationship, but the next exciting adventure that can make today amazing and living for today, right?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
You're actually touching on one of my favorite. Oh, did you have something, Anne-Marie?
I was just going to say, because the name of your podcast is just like my whole philosophy of living. So as soon as you reached out to me, I was like, yeah, I want to be on there.
I love it. That's fabulous. That's absolutely fabulous. Yeah. One of the things that I keep thinking about here as we're talking about this is the incredible power that we all have that we kind of dismiss. But to bring it out in a particular context, you were talking about relationships and how important it is to talk things out in relationships. I find it really interesting and odd that the word relationship has gotten to the point where people forget where it comes from. Relating, having conversation. And I have personal experience with this. It's amazing how often relationships can fail because the relationships stop relating. The conversations just come to an end.
It's so true because we begin to, excuse me, sorry about that. We begin to take our partners for granted because they're there every day and we're used to them and they're not as interesting anymore or as funny anymore because we know all their jokes and we know all their stories and, they're busy working and we're busy working and there's no excitement there anymore. And so then when someone outside the relationship pays attention to us, then all of a sudden, there's those feelings of excitement that you don't get anymore and it makes you feel attractive and it makes you feel desirable. And I think that's what can draw people into these infidelities that, they maybe wouldn't have been involved in if they had a stronger, more consistent connection with their partner. But it's just so hard to have that because I feel like we don't teach children, like Anne-Marie said, we don't teach children about connection, about intimacy, about friendship and relating, as you said, and these are the things that should be the most important things we teach children because our relationships are the most important things that we will ever have in our lives. If we have nothing or if we have everything materially, none of that matters if we don't have relationships, There's
a really odd thing there. Most interesting thing, the most, I don't know what word to describe it other than what I just said, but is we're asking people to teach their kids about relationships. And it turns out the best way to do that is to have a relationship with your kid. I mean, just by doing that, you teach them how to have a relationship. It's amazing.
It is amazing. I know. It's incredible. And I grew up, I'm sure you both had like possibly similar childhoods to me, where at least when my parents were young parents, it was like, do as I say, and, you don't need a reason and that kind of thing. And I feel like my parents, or at least my mother, because my dad was absent a lot of the time, but I feel like a lot of the time my mother didn't really know me or acknowledge me because she didn't have that relationship with me, because she was just doing it the way she'd been taught to do it. And that's just how, and it wasn't, she was a great mother in the context of how she knew to mother, but she didn't develop those relationships with us the way that I have with my children. So now my children are adults, and we have just incredible conversations, and I'm amazed at how good my children are at communicating. And I know it's because we've been able to talk like this, and so I'm like, I did a good job. I made some mistakes, and I'm not going to tell you them, but at least in that way, I did something right.
Yeah. That's so important. That ties into what you were talking about earlier, how you like to listen to podcasts and read books and so forth that are uplifting. And the reason that uplifting is so important is because that's how we remind ourselves of what we've done well, what's gone right in our lives. Because we have this strong tendency to focus all of our attention on everything that's going wrong, when in fact, a lot of stuff is going right.
Yes.
That's an example of it right there.
And I think a lot of the time too is we will focus on what's going wrong for us and think how bad it is. But if we were to look around, we could see that we actually don't have it so bad. So for instance, I recently had a surgery where I now have an ileostomy, which is like a poop bag on my stomach. And when I think people look at me and they give me this look of horror when they find out, and they're so like upset for me and sorry for me. And I don't feel sorry for myself, because I think how lucky I am, number one, that I now have a better quality of life. But also I look at like mothers with babies who have ileostomies. And I think, I'm glad I have one and I don't have a baby with one. Or when I was really sick and I was in the hospital, I used to think, I'm glad it's me and not one of my children, because I could always see that there could be a way that this could be worse. And I was just grateful that it wasn't worse for me in my context of what is worse,
Well, you also found a way to take that thing that could be seen as worse and found a way to see it better. That's the way I would describe it.
Yeah. And a lot of that came because of my adult entertainment community and my clients, because they were the ones who said to me, no one's going to see you different. And so you shouldn't see yourself different. And it made me re-examine my own ideas of my own worthiness, because if I don't think I'm worthwhile or sexy or beautiful or, someone that people would pay money to see, for instance, because that's my industry, because of a poop bag, then that's me denigrating myself. And when I had my clients and my colleagues say that it makes no difference, it's just a bag. It's a small part of who you are and what you have to offer. Then I realized that I wasn't giving them the credit they deserve, that they aren't shallow human beings. And I wasn't giving myself the credit I deserved, that I'm beautiful regardless, and that it has nothing to do with how I go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it makes total sense. You mentioned your clients. I presume you meant coaching clients. Who does come to you for coaching? I mean, all coaches they always find themselves in a particular niche, not necessarily because they predicted it or chose it, selected it, but because that's who showed up. Who shows up as your client? What's your client like?
That's so funny. Actually, when I said client, I was actually more referring to the people who purchase like my services.
Oh, okay.
So my fans on OnlyFans or my massage clients. However, as a coach, I'm finding that the people who are mostly interested in my services are other adult entertainers and clients, surprisingly. So,
interesting.
Yeah, they want to, because we've created this relationship where they can be vulnerable, they can admit things to me that they wouldn't admit to anyone else. And these relationships, some of these are in-person relationships, some of these are online relationships, but they feel safer with me and to tell me really their feelings than they would with maybe another coach. And that's another weird thing. Like in most coaching relationships, you would never ever accept intimacy as part of that relationship because it would be considered unprofessional.
Right.
But people who work in the adult entertainment industry have to walk that line all the time. And so you learn how to have boundaries, communicate those boundaries, and enforce those boundaries so that you can actually have intimacy in like a coaching relationship, for instance.
Right. I was thinking back to that conversation I had. I incorrectly named that previous guest who was on the show. His name wasn't Corey. Paul, it was Corey. But I remember this conversation with Corey along this line. And one of the things he talked about was also talking about the boundaries and how important it is to build them and how important, I mean, you basically need them in order to navigate your way through that industry.
Yes.
In fact, I think it's probably safe to say that people in that industry have stronger boundaries than anybody else.
Yeah. I would have to agree. I think what happens is when you're in this industry, you learn how to communicate your boundaries and how to enforce them because you have to. It's like any other industry that you get into. Certain things you really have to learn how to do. And because it's a situation where people don't know the rules, because we don't teach this stuff obviously in our society. And so when clients or fans come into a adult entertainer relationship, they do need to be taught or they need to be told what the boundaries are and what to expect. And then when you take into consideration that every single person in the adult entertainment industry has different boundaries, then it becomes even more important to have that communication and be able to communicate and maintain those boundaries. And then also to say to your clients, like for instance, in the case of a massage session, what are your boundaries? Or make sure that you let me know what your boundaries are, because people are often really uncomfortable to say. Like, I know when I go just for a back massage and someone's pushing too hard, I'm sometimes nervous to say, that hurts. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But that's how you have to be. You have to be able to say what is or isn't comfortable for you.
Right.
And so, so you have to encourage that, and you have to like create an environment where people feel really open to be vulnerable and be their true selves.
For someone who might be listening who wanted to have more of a conversation with you, because, I mean, for the right person, I can see you'd be a really useful and interesting conversation. How do they find you? How do they reach you?
They can find me at annietemple.com. I also have a link tree at TNT Annie. But
Okay.
yeah, you could find all my links there. And I would love to hear from people. I love hearing from people.
What kinds of things are they going to find on your website?
Because I have kind of two areas. So I have my adult entertainment work. So I have an actual website, tntannie.ca, which is mostly for that. And that's to draw people into my OnlyFans.
Okay.
And then I have annietemple.com, which is more for my writing, coaching, speaking business. And, you know, when I found out I was having all these health problems, I kind of rushed to create a new business in case I couldn't do adult entertainment anymore. And I'm a writer at heart, and I love writing and I love speaking. And so now I have best of both worlds. So I'm just really happy. But yeah, this one side of it, I feel like I like to keep them a little bit separate because people are looking for different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that makes total sense. It really does. Well, it also reinforces for me something that now this fits in. And if you've been listening to the podcast, you've heard this bit at the end of each episode anyway, but it's something that over the last couple of years, I became really aware that we were not noticing enough. We weren't giving attention to. And you've just given me a new level for appreciating. Here's another way we're not giving attention, the way we're not appreciating in a way that we need to, because you've come onto this podcast. You have your own, your own materials that you're putting out, the stuff. You're a writer. You said, you're doing your own writing and so forth. You have, I believe you have a book out. What's the name of your book?
Annie Temple's Business Bible for Erotic Entrepreneurs.
Okay. All right.
And my memoir is coming out in April, next April.
A memoir.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you're creating that, and you have, I'm sure, many people following you on OnlyFans and others. So a lot of people picking up the variety of content that you're putting out, not just sexual content, but there's a variety of content that you're putting out there.
Yeah.
And it so often happens. I mean, you are a person who has, you fit into the mold of people who come onto the show. They have, gone through stuff in their life. They've come out the other side with stuff they want to share, and you're sharing it with the world. And they're sharing it with people that very often they never meet and they never see. never will meet, never will see. Mm-hmm. And they're helping them in ways they don't even know about. And that's the part that I noticed. That's the part that I said, wait a minute. We got all these people doing all this stuff, helping people in ways they don't even know about, and they're not getting credit for it. So I'd like to say on behalf of those people that you've never met and you've never seen, never will meet, never will see, who you've been helping in a large variety of ways that, we can't even begin to describe all of them here. On behalf of those people you've been helping, thank you for what you've been doing. Because you're making a difference in this world.
That is so sweet. You're actually bringing tears to my eyes.
I'm just trying to give you the Stacey Dales experience is what that is. Yeah.
It means a lot. I've been through a lot.
It's a really big deal.
It means a lot. Thank you.
My computer went to find the Stacey Dales experience. Okay. You never know what a computer is going to do. Emery, I'm not really sure that this is going to be the easiest one for you to answer, but I often ask you to answer the question. If you were to draw one thing, one thought, one idea, one concept that came out of this conversation, what's the one that stands out the most to you?
Do you know what? I think it's how judgmental people can be, because I think if Annie was in another industry, she'd be the president of your country. She's got so skills. Honestly, I feel very powerful listening to your strength and to your words. So, yeah, don't judge. Learn.
Here I go again. Thank you. I'm sorry. I didn't expect this. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. It's just that, I've been on a few podcasts. I'm pretty new to doing podcasting, but this is the most comfortable conversation I've had where I felt like I can really be real. And I just thank you guys very much.
Well, then it's mutual. We really, really appreciate what you've given, what you've been talking about, what you've been sharing with us. Wow. Just once again, my mind is blown. I learned so much from all the guests who come onto this program and the co-hosts who come onto this program, because I keep getting new perspectives I've never even considered before. Today is another one of those. It's like, okay, brain expanded a little bit further than it was just yesterday, all because of that. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us today, Annie. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.